My name is Reuven Sussman. I direct the Behavior, Health, and Human Dimensions program at ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And you might be wondering why behavior is in the topic in this world at all. And that's because decision making is part of what we study and what we think about. And investigating why industries participate in energy efficiency programs or not is an important topic that we think that we wanted to cover. Our industry program here at ACEEE was wondering why this is the case, and so we felt like that's something we can investigate. And I'm very happy to bring you, after over a year of work on this project, the results of a report we recently released, alongside the work of a few folks on the ground at various utilities that have implemented energy efficiency programs. So let me share a little bit about um, what we'll be talking about today and how we'll be proceeding. Um, First, the ACEEE, or the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, I should tell you a little bit about us. We're a nonprofit research organization that develops policies to reduce energy waste and combat climate change. Our independent analysis advances investments, programs, and behaviors that use energy more effectively and help build an equitable, clean energy future. You can learn more at our website. We do a number of these webinars throughout the year, so stay tuned for that. Now, for this webinar itself, we're recording this webinar and making it available to all of you within a few business days, along with the slides. So you don't need to ask about that. We'll be providing that. To ask a question during the webinar, submit it via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to it during our Q&A segment at the end of the webinar after our speakers have spoken. I'll also be monitoring the chat. You can use the chat to talk with one another and network throughout the webinar. I encourage you to talk with each other about what you're hearing, reflect on what it is, and if you have any thoughts or questions, you can put it in there. I'll be monitoring the Q&A and the chat, and at the end of the webinar, I'll present those to our speakers and we can talk more. Again, my name is Reuven Sussman. I'm just the moderator here. In a moment, I'll turn it over to Grace Llewellyn, Senior Research Analyst with the Behavior and Human Dimensions program. She wrote the report that we're centering this webinar on. And after that, we'll talk to Josh Kessler at National Grid about the program that he helped develop and work with utilities on, or work with industry on. And then Mark Siegel, who's currently at Rhode Island Energy, also implementing energy efficiency programs. And they'll be talking about the challenges and strategies that they've used. So without further ado, Grace, why don't you share your screen and get started?
All right, thank you, Reuven. Give me 1 second here to get my slides up. All right. Hopefully you can all now see my presentation. But yes, I am Grace Llewellyn, and I work at ACEEE as part of the Behavioral Health and Human Dimensions team. And yes, I was the lead author and researcher of this new report on industrial capital investment decision making. So today I'm hoping to run you briefly through the work that we did and a selection of our findings. And it's going to have to be pretty fast. But of course, if you have any other questions, there is a report to reference. I'll get to it. So what we wanted to understand with this work, that can be summarized into 4 key questions. Who plays a role in energy-related capital investment decisions? How do firms find out about energy programs, and what factors are driving or inhibiting the investment and participation in these programs? So I do want to center on the focus of this work, so everyone knows what I'm referring to when I'm talking about it. The research is actually about capital investment decision making and the program participation connected to those decisions. So we're talking about larger energy-related projects like equipment replacement, system upgrades, or even process changes for manufacturing firms, and the related CapEx programs, energy efficiency programs, incentives, etc. Thus, we're not focusing on SEM or operations-based programs. I'm so sorry if that was what you thought today was going to be, but it's worth noting that there could be some overlap that's of interest to you. So we did also focus specifically on medium and large-sized industrial firms in the US across a few key sectors. So quickly, the methods that we used. This was primarily a qualitative research project paired with a literature review. We conducted 7 interviews with industrial firms as well as program administrators focusing on food and beverage, cement, and pulp and paper industries. All of these interviewees had relevant experience with energy investment decision-making and/or program engagement. And on the industrial side, that included a range of roles. So we had plant level, facility level engineers, project staff, as well as sustainability and energy managers at a more corporate level. So uh, some context before we get into the energy specific or program specific findings. I do think it'll be helpful to step back and level set about how industrial CapEx decisions generally work. So these programs are competing for limited internal resources. Somebody already said it in the chat. So that means, people are preparing cost estimates, technical analyses. They have to have a clear project justification, and they're going to go through some form of internal review process. And for larger projects like these sort of energy projects usually, that review is going to move from that facility level to up through the corporate, regional, executive, and/or board approval. So there's a range of different ways that can happen, but there will be a formal decision process that's already sorting, ranking, and competitively evaluating energy-related projects against internal criteria as well as other non-energy related projects and priorities. So that's why we're describing the CapEx decision-making space as kind of moving through a decision ecosystem. There are many different roles that can influence whether or not an energy efficiency project gets developed, how it gets evaluated, and whether it's ultimately approved. And opportunity identification and approval are often separated by roles. So the people who are seeing project needs or developing project ideas aren't necessarily the people who are controlling the purse, allocating that funding. So in large firms, there's rarely going to be one right decision maker to engage. Instead, influence is pretty distributed across different people and functions and levels of the firm. Okay, so just one other note, it's not really a linear process. There's kind of a cyclical element of it, but the key point is many different actors have different levels of influence. And with that, moving into how programs become relevant to the firms, across the organizations that we interviewed, program marketing and outreach were not what initiated industries energy-related capital projects. These firms generally did look for incentives and program support, but that was usually after a project idea had already existed. You could see here from this quote, they initiated the outreach to the program administrator about a specific project, and that's how that ended up happening for them. So the pattern isn't necessarily, there's an energy program, so let's invent a project. More often, it's going to be somebody's noticing a real need first, and then the question becomes, is there any program or incentive or support that can help make this viable and pass this through approvals? So one common project starting point is what we might call like a bottom-up pathway. So someone close to the equipment or operations is noticing a problem or an opportunity and develops a project idea. And these folks are going to be more likely your facility level staff, like your engineers, project leads, operations. They're going to surface those energy related needs tied to their job roles and such. But there also is the more top-down pathway, if you will, where like a corporate level manager, somebody like a strategic director or an energy manager or sustainability manager, they might develop or shape a project idea that's tied to a bigger corporate-wide or company-wide strategic goal for the company. So they're out there looking for what sites or plants have opportunities to improve performance or get to that sustainability goal, et cetera. And as I noted, these energy programs, they become relevant after that idea already exists in many cases. Not all cases, everything's very heterogeneous, but the patterns we're talking about here, that kind of creates a window of opportunity within the time period where they're searching for information after the project's been developed in conception stage, but before it's been evaluated. And folks this is on the information flows in firms. So firms are typically looking internally first in order to get a sense of what's out there. Unless they're the person that has the existing program or utility relationship, these staff personnel who are developing project ideas, they are likely going to reach out first to their trusted internal contacts. That makes sense, right? To find out, who is that primary point of contact if it's not me? Who could point me in the right direction for that person that I want to contact at the program or the utility level. What other folks in my company have done a similar program? And then who generally in my company knows what incentives or resources are available? And our interviewees could consistently identify somebody in their company that they knew that they could go to help get a sense of what incentives are out there for them. So in our report, we call these people internal scanners. So a scanner would be somebody who is actively tracking relevant program opportunities and helping colleagues get their project needs some available support. And that sometimes is exactly what an energy manager or sustainability lead does. But the scanner role is not always a formal thing. It's not always located in the same part of the firm. What we're trying to describe here is more of an important function for how information flows throughout the firm, not a job title. But yeah, like I said, in some firms, that's going to be the energy manager or sustainability lead. But in others, it may be somebody in government affairs or corporate support or operations who's out there looking for all sorts of programs that are outside of just energy specific ones. And these are the people who are helping outside program information move through the firm's internal network. And they might be a very important audience for program outreach. But internal scanners are easy for programs to miss because they're not always the formal decision maker or the project developer or that primary utility account contact. So programs should consider asking their customers about, who's out there, not using our term of internal scanner, please, but asking who's out there who knows about this in the firm, who would you go to? Because it might be good to equip them with the right program information. So moving into some more about like the factors that would encourage investment and participation. One interesting finding I wanted to highlight was the value of strategic project categorization. So basically, we know it goes without saying, financial motivation is what's getting people in the door, but cost savings can get a project considered, but that doesn't necessarily mean savings alone is going to be enough to get a project approved. And when an energy efficiency project is framed and justified in the approval process as a cost savings project, it's likely going to be judged by the firm's strictest financial criteria. So that's going to be short payback requirements and high ROI thresholds and sensitivity to those low energy prices or volatile energy prices, which we're experiencing right now. So even projects that might pencil out with real long-term value, they can stall out if they're sitting in that narrow cost savings lane. So this quote kind of gets at the key insight here. The same energy-related upgrade may be evaluated very differently depending on how the firm categorizes the project internally. So if a project is justified as a project for safety or quality or sustainability or a stay in business project, that's going to face probably a more flexible financial approval logic than a project that's justified only through cost savings, right? So the point is not that the financial value doesn't matter, it clearly does, but project category can shape what kind of financial test the project's going to have to pass, or whether strict payback is even the main test. Again, the quote here I think says a lot. For cost savings project, we have a payback limit, but if there's really no clear criteria for a severe quality concern or a safety concern. Different firms are going to have different project justification types, their own set of criteria. So from a program perspective, it's probably going to be worth asking what sort of project categories would overlap with energy related projects and whether there are some deferred or paused or standby projects that energy efficiency could kind of add on to that could get that across the threshold. Because projects that tick multiple boxes are also something we found to be more likely to advance within a firm. One other smaller enabling factor I wanted to note is technology demonstrations. So we heard a lot about how there are risk perceptions around energy-related investments and program participation. New technologies can inherently feel very risky, especially if firms can't see how they're going to perform in their own operating context. So programs can reduce that uncertainty by helping firms observe or test or evaluate technologies under more realistic conditions, like demonstrations or site visits, test beds. The demonstrations make the technology feel more concrete and help firms assess whether it would actually work for them. Kind of changes the choice framing. So on the more inhibiting side of factors here, got to do the classic shout out to the administrative burden. I'm not going to go into this much because you know the story, but the biggest obstacle is that sometimes there's just so much paperwork that it's not even worth trying. And the cost benefit analysis that people are doing, it's just not always ending up in programs' favor. So Another inhibiting factor is poor engagement timing. So program information can obviously arrive too late to be useful. Capital planning happens for all these firms, capital expenditure planning, months or even years before it ever gets implemented, and being mindful of that is critical. But additionally, procurement timelines and maintenance shutdowns can create really narrow windows of opportunity. I think this quote's pretty good. The equipment that they need for a process improvement would have really long lead times, and they can only be installed during certain times of the year when they're already doing maintenance, like this quote right here. We do our annual maintenance once a year for 3 weeks. Any CapEx has to be done during that time period. And if we get delayed even a month, that bumps us out a whole other year. And that's just not a risk that a lot of firms in this position would really want to be taking. So timing really matters a lot, and program engagement needs to line up with actual project development and implementation windows.
Hey,
Um,
Grace, if you
I
could
said,
just
yeah.
try wrapping it up pretty soon here.
Yep, perfect. That was exactly the timing I was going to ask you about. There's nothing wrong, in my view, with previewing how much more I would tell you about if I had time, but I don't. So it's just a little tease that if any of that interests you, then please go ahead and check out the report. But just to run real quick through our recommendations here, we think it's important to improve project and program discoverability. You need to make sure we tap into those internal channels that we're not tapping into, those scanners. Make program support easier to find. Profile firms with more nuance. We can find out more about their capital planning cycles, but also their project justification categories and their strategic goals, as well as projects that are just kind of sitting on the bench. We can frame benefits better around other priorities that aren't just cost savings, because that can limit us in our ability to get through approvals. And then on the program design side, again, aligning program timelines with firms' decision making is important, but also let's offer more predictable long funding windows if at all possible. I know it's not like an easy ask, but that really signals program stability that firms really need right now, and it helps them plan around budget cycles. We could also stage out concept proposals. I think one of our speakers here might talk about that. That can help people understand if a project is worth pursuing before they have to invest heavily in engineering. And then, of course, let's emphasize credibility, because folks out there don't find a lot of value in generic assistance. They want to have program expertise feature the processes that they work with. So I think that's the one thing I probably had to skip over too fast. So that's the last takeaway I put there. So again, if any of that piques your interest and there's more to the story, if you check out our report. Thanks for that. Looking forward to your questions, and I think I'm gonna pass this over to Josh.
All right. Well, thanks, Grace. And thanks for having me today. Let me just pull up what I had to share today. So I was going to talk through National Grid's industrial initiative. Um, a little bit of background on our industrial initiative. We launched this back in 2014 in collaboration with Leidos Engineering to help industrial customers in Massachusetts reduce their energy use and their utility bills. So this is part of our state mandated energy efficiency programs, and we've been doing this for 12 years now, and have a lot of experience with it. And we've been continuously refining our approach over time as new program offerings become available and as the market changes. So what we offer, there are sort of three overarching components. First of all, there's technical assistance, which includes certainly an upfront site assessment to identify measures and we would typically look at a combination of utility bills, utility demand, demand data and such, along with a walkthrough of the facility by a skilled engineer with expertise in the industrial space. Once measures have been identified, we would provide a detailed analysis of the project savings and economics. So basically, that analysis would be done by a third party or by our own team, as opposed to whatever contractor would be implementing the measures. So getting kind of a fair assessment of that savings. And then performance verification is the third piece of it, where The world is full of projects that were anticipated to generate a whole lot of savings, generate a whole lot of economic benefits, and at the end of the day, don't perform as anticipated. I'm sure many folks on the phone have experience with that. So our process is right at the start, we create what we call a minimum requirements document, which lays out the engineering parameters that we're expecting to see from from the project. And then at the end of the project, once the equipment's been installed, typically we pay out at least a portion of the incentive upfront, and then sometimes we would withhold a portion of the incentive until the savings have actually been verified. So that'll include some combination of metering in a lot of cases, along with just looking at other performance parameters, making sure all the equipment is there as anticipated. Incentives, obviously the number one reason that people approach us, and certainly the largest budget item for us to help buy down the cost of the project. So incentives typically are somewhat based on project savings with some nuance around that. There's a lot of variability. And then the third piece of it is sort of project management, we call it. So it can be helping customer identify a vendor who can help with who can complete their project, usually solicit multiple bids in a lot of cases. It could be just helping shepherd a project both through our process and through through the entire process of building out a project. And just one thing I'll note, the technical assistance approach with a site assessment, that's sort of the cookie cutter approach. But in reality, what we see is a lot of repeat business coming back to us. So once we've worked with a customer once, usually they'll come back year after year after year with new projects. Some of those might have been identified through a site assessment originally. Some of those might be identified by the customer or by other vendors that they're working with. So we'll work through the process with them to estimate the savings, verify the performance, and ultimately pay out an incentive. So some of the keys to success that we see, and I think these align well with what Grace was just describing. First off, customer relationships, that's huge. Like I said, most of our program activity is driven through those relationships, through that repeat business. And so we have our vendor, Leidos, who maintains relationships along with some of the folks on our internal and national grid. So the relationships are absolutely key. Beyond that, Leidos has a lot of expertise in the industrial sector. They have engineers on staff who are used to analyzing equipment at different types of industrial facilities, both on site and by looking at performance data on different projects. Another piece of it, I know that our incentive process can at times be cumbersome, especially for more complex custom projects. So I mentioned Leidos helps sort of manage that process, manage the whole utility incentivization process. And then in addition to that, we've come up with some sort of tricks along the way to help streamline, especially the upfront savings determination that are needed for the incentive. So one of those, in the past, we used to have a lot of customers or vendors would come with a savings calculation, and then our internal engineers would look at it and say, whoa, we don't agree with that. So what we've come up with is what we call a tech check to upfront sort of agree on qualitatively what the methodology for determining savings should be, and then that staves off that kind of situation where we reject the savings calculations and tell people to go back to the drawing board. And so that again that drives the incentive. Another approach, and this is more on the utility side, but we have what's called our ex-ante review process, where we'd have third-party evaluator look at the savings methodology, look at the entire savings approach, and just make sure that they're on board. And so that kind of gives us, as the utility, confidence that a third party would agree with our approach to determining the savings. Lastly is the customer confidence that the funding will be there, that if they invest in a $1 million project, for example, that our cost share will be there. So we offer upfront commitment letters, where those are essentially formal, legally binding documents where once we have sent that to the customer and they've signed it, we are bound to pay out the funds once they have implemented the project in accordance with the engineering requirements. And then lastly is a long-term commitment to the program. So in Massachusetts, the Green Communities Act was enacted back in 2008. The programs have certainly evolved substantially over time, but there has been a very long-term commitment to energy efficiency as a whole in Massachusetts, and that has given us the opportunity to run programs like the Industrial Initiative for extended periods of time. And in turn, that gives customers a lot more confidence that the funding will continue to be there over time, and it is worth their time and effort to work with us, and they can rely on the funds. So outcomes. Number one is we're looking at a really diverse range of end uses. So in some areas, commercial buildings, more traditional, say office buildings, for example, you used to see a lot of savings from lighting, maybe from HVAC, but it was sort of a less diverse range of end uses and just less diverse range of energy savings. So the industrial program, so this is an 8-year period from 2016 to 2023, we really have seen a broad range of savings from a broad range of end uses. So industrial process measures, certainly the number one measure out there, comprising 28% of our savings over time. Compressed air and lighting are sort of tied for number two, but certainly a lot of compressed air in those facilities. HVAC, there's also significant savings. Refrigeration, and then just kind of a hodgepodge of other measures. Motors and drives, it looks like the label got cut off there, but that is the other about 9% slice of savings. So the results are, in an average year, we have about 150 to 200 projects on the electric side, and then some additional projects yielding gas savings. And so on average, we save 17 million kilowatt hours each year, and that compounds over time. So over an 8-year period, that's over 100 million kilowatt hours in savings. And if you look at energy prices in Massachusetts, that adds up to a whole lot of money over time. And then just the last thing I'll note is that in Massachusetts, the direction that the energy efficiency programs have taken is to expand really more broadly to decarbonization, and in particular to a focus on electrification. So that includes heating in a lot of commercial buildings, and on the residential side, in industrial buildings, there's also a major focus on electrifying industrial processes. So that is all I had, and I was going to turn it over to Mark.
Hello, everyone. Mark Siegel with Rhode Island Energy. Thank you, Josh. Thank you to ACEEE for hosting this webinar. It's really an interesting subject, and it's really intriguing is that intersection, between industrial firms, capital investment strategies and decision-making process, as well as we as the program administrators also are making investments on behalf of our ratepayers through our energy efficiency programs. And so what was really interesting to me is the intersection between those two, which I tried to show through this graphic here. So let's get past that and let's move on to, very similar to what Josh was just describing. our industrial initiative brings significant benefits to Rhode Island Energy ratepayers. Approximately 35% of our electric and gas savings in a given year come from the industrial initiative. These projects tend to be a lower cost per unit of savings, so lower cost per kWh or lower cost per therm than the overall C&I, commercial and industrial or business customer sector. So, in that sense, we're getting more savings per dollar invested on behalf of our ratepayers than other projects. So again, lots of benefits for our ratepayers. The average project size is about twice that of non-industrial projects. So, that time and effort and resources to move those projects through the various stages, as Josh was describing, and I'll speak to in just a moment. Again, more benefits coming out from the time from Rhode Island Energy staff to work on those projects and our vendors who help support us with those projects. And so in 2025, 4 of the 6 largest projects, no surprise here, 4 of the 6 largest projects in terms of savings were from the industrial initiative. So all reflecting that benefit to Rhode Island Energy ratepayers by us making those investments in those projects. So getting these projects right, as Josh was just describing, is critical. And, the 5 elements that I've listed here, very similar to some of the elements described by Josh. Establishing the base case, we need to know what the existing equipment was that is operating in the plant, or if it's new construction, what the base case would be there absent our program. And that's going to help us to calculate what the energy savings are for that project. Looking at the high efficiency option versus the base case option and the energy consumption between those. We're going to document those savings. We're going to use similarly a minimum requirements document that establish what the set points are, what the assumptions are. And then after the installation, we're going to verify those energy savings, and oftentimes using metering data to verify those energy savings, and so that the benefits are realized. The incentive, and I think this is a really interesting element that Grace spoke about in terms of our programs and the incentives are not usually the starting point for some projects, and I'll give you some examples in the next slide of 2 different types of projects. And but what we're seeking to do, again, as the administrators of these programs on behalf of our ratepayers, is to set that incentive at the level that's no more than what is needed for the customer to proceed with that project. So yeah, that's not a exact science. We will use some thresholds. So we'll look to ensure that the customer at a minimum has at least a 1-year payback for that investment. But as Josh also mentioned, the incentives can also be tied to the energy savings for the project. And then because not all projects, because customers may bring projects to us, we also have to make an assessment of free ridership. And that's not a binary result of yes, they're a free rider, or no, they're not a free rider, but rather it's a combination of a number of different data points. I'll speak about that in a minute or two in terms of assessing the customer and whether they're likely to be a free rider, but a critical component to our delivery of these programs. And then finally, in Rhode Island, we are subject for the largest of projects, so projects that have an incentive larger than $1 million, or combined heat and power or CHP projects with more than 1 megawatt of load. They are subject to a regulatory review before we're going to issue a commitment letter to that customer. So let's explore for a moment just two different types of projects, if you will. One is the case where the customer was not aware of the project. And in fact, we identified the energy efficiency opportunity, maybe because we had an auditor go in and do an audit, identify some measures, and bring those measures to our customer. And they then work within their organization to get the capital funding, to get the approval, et cetera, to go forward with that project. In that sense, clearly the timeline, if you think of it in terms of a timeline, clearly we've been involved from the very beginning. We brought that project to the customer. And so the likelihood that they're a free rider is less than the other project scenario that I have here, and the one that Grace spoke to about, our programs are not usually the starting point for some of the capital investments made by our customers. I want to echo Josh's point that these projects are a reflection of, we've been working with these customers for 30 plus years. And similar to National Grid, the industrial initiative for 10 plus years. And so they are familiar with our programs. They're making decisions in their own space, but they have most likely participated before. And that relationship between us and them is critical, and may contribute and help them to move forward with a project, even if they have not received the official commitment letter from us, for the incentive amount for that specific project. So that's the second type of project that we might encounter on a ongoing basis with these customers. And truly, a customer, both types of projects can occur for the same customer, where we've identified the measure, as well as others where they brought the project to us. So in the case of customers bringing the project to us, how do we assess the extent to which they're a free rider or not a free rider, which is critical in terms of our being able to claim those savings looking forward through our programs? And what we did was Rhode Island Energy has spent the last few months looking at our peer utilities. We've been to see what best practices are across the country. And we've identified, six tactics, if you will, that help us with making that assessment. 5 of the 6 we are currently doing. The 6th one, which was new to us, is the first one, which is to do a free ridership survey before we commit to the incentive. So again, it's not a binary, yes or no in terms of free ridership, but rather we will use a survey instrument to assess the customer's likelihood of being a free rider. We'll do that through interviews with key personnel at the utility, and then use that information to help us along with the data we collect from the other 5 tactics. The second one is having a C-suite executive, certify what the customer would have done absent the program, without the incentive. Is there a history of similar completed projects? Does the customer have, or the company have, a history of similar completed projects that might indicate what their investment would be, absent the program, or in other utilities where incentives are offered with programs in those geographic regions. Third is, as I spoke earlier, documenting the existing baseline conditions. That's critical for just calculating the savings, and doing a pre-inspection We're going to go out and verify the existing equipment and the operating conditions of that existing equipment. We're going to, as I mentioned, in terms of an incentive requiring a minimum payback for projects. Otherwise, if it's less than, for example, 1 year, then it's quite likely the customer might do that regardless of the incentive. So we're going to look at the financial threshold in terms of getting the incentive right, as well as using the information that we gather from the financial criteria that the customer provides us. And then the last one, and I think this one also reflects the complexity of making determinations about customers' intent with and without the program, is has the customer already ordered the equipment? Where are they in terms of moving the project forward? If we have our requirements for approving a project, the customer also has maybe a timeline in terms of when the project can be installed. Maybe it's during a period of during the summer when the plant is shut down for 2 weeks. And so they've got their constraints. And while the customer ordering the equipment does not necessarily mean they are a free rider ordering the equipment before they receive the pre-approval from us, but certainly if they wait till after the pre-approval is received, then it does seem to demonstrate that the customer is waiting for feedback on the incentive and the availability of it, and that may reflect that they're not a free rider. So that's my last slide. I'm going to return it back to Reuven, I think, and thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you to all three of our speakers. I'd invite you all to unmute and come back on camera as we start going over some of these interesting questions that were mentioned both in the chat and in the Q&A. So once again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, or if you want to talk about what you've heard, put that into the chat. Let me just go through some of the questions that we have so far. So Grace, why don't we start with you? Elliot Crow asks, did demand costs or demand response come up in the research as a driver for CapEx upgrade decisions?
I'm afraid not. In none of the interviews did anyone mention specifically demand costs or demand response in those sorts of terms. But there's always the concerns about costs in general, and I'm sure that these things do play a role to some extent.
Yeah, thanks. And Josh, Earl Sarin, I hope I pronounced that correctly, asked about the commitment letters, and I'm interested in those as well. With the commitment letters, when are you able to release the funds if the customer is questionable at proceeding so that other customers can access those incentives? And I was just also wondering about the commitment letters, if you could just tell me a little bit more about them in general. Are they used as just for contracting purposes, or are they sort of because we are behavioral scientists, is it like a device that might encourage people to actually upgrade? So just get them to commit in the first place, and then afterwards, they're more likely to fall through. You're muted, Josh.
Yeah, I would say probably both. I think certainly they are a contract between us and the customer. But once they have a contract in hand, certainly that's the intention is also to get them to commit. And then to the question of how do we release the funds? So essentially we have a pretty large portfolio of projects. So hundreds of projects, well, over 100 industrial projects, probably over 1,000 commercial projects that come through each year. And that's all sort of one single pool of funds. So we have a pretty good sense from just past experience. We have a forecast of how much will actually come through, what percentage of projects will actually come through. So we don't need to look on a project by project basis and reserve funds for each individual project, since we have a sense of what's going to come through overall across the portfolio.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Lots of questions coming in, so I'm trying to stay on top of those while asking a few that came up earlier. Mark, uh, Eugene Lee asks, and I would love to hear about this too. Could you further explain the ways that industrial savings benefit all ratepayers? I think you made a good point about that, and I just want to emphasize that and let you explain a little more.
Yeah, so these programs, when they save a kilowatt hour or therm, have benefits in terms of reduced energy bills for all ratepayers over time. And so the extent to which we can get those savings at a lower cost, which these industrial projects allow us to, means we're getting, in essence, a better return on our ratepayers' investments through these projects than maybe a project that does not, that costs more to save that kilowatt hour. And I don't mean cost more is a negative thing. I think it's just the reality of when you have an industrial facility, you have long run hours. So there's a lot of potential for energy savings with those projects versus if we think about a direct install small business program where our vendors going out and installing high efficiency equipment, there's just more cost to doing that project and the run hours are nowhere near as long. So the opportunity for those savings are nowhere near as long for that program. And they all contribute. I mean, the reality is they all contribute into the energy efficiency funding and programs. So we should be delivering these services across all of them, but certainly the industrial programs are a better quote return on a dollar invested in terms of energy savings.
Thanks. We just got a question in from, well, more a comment from Dennis Lamoureux. It's that, we talked a lot about the actual implementation of the programs, and Grace did talk a little bit about the actual topic, the title, I guess, of this presentation, which is Understanding Decision Making. Mark and Josh, you both mentioned as a key to your success the relationships and the importance of ongoing repeat business. I was just wondering, well, if you could talk a little bit more about your actual experience on the ground of developing those relationships. For example, Mark, I know you've been doing this for decades. Sorry to call you out there, but do you think that the fact that you've just been doing it for a long time is really important to building those relationships? How do you build relationships?
Yeah, that's such an important element. I wish I had a great answer to it. It's time, it's effort, it's showing up at that customer's facility over and over and over again, talking about these programs. I think in Grace's slide, she talks about sometimes the timing is not right. Absolutely true. We're there talking with our customers, and we may not in that discussion be able to have the customer agree to do an audit at that moment in time to identify opportunities. I think someone when you started the discussion, Reuven, you mentioned competing priorities and limited capacity to assess EE opportunities. That's the reality that these customers are dealing with every single day. We're going to show up and continually promote our programs and encourage their participation so that hopefully we develop that relationship. We develop the confidence that the customer believes that spending the time with us will result, and I think Josh spoke to this really nicely, in an incentive for a project that will mean that one, the juice is worth the squeeze, which I hate that saying, but the juice is worth the squeeze. And two, they can rely on those incentives and have confidence that when they work with us, we're going to work together to get high efficiency equipment installed. And I'll defer to Josh. He may have other thoughts.
No, I thought you answered that well.
Josh, just on the topic of, one thing that Grace mentioned in the report, and I know we talked about this when we were planning this webinar, but the predictability of these programs and the reliability, can you tell us a little bit more about how that has affected participation in your experience?
Certainly, our understanding is the longer we run the programs, the more confident people are, and the more they can be confident that their funding will be available. I guess the other thing, predictability on a project by project basis, where because we're looking at the savings in order to incentivize these projects, one engineer may look at a project one way, another engineer may look at it differently. So one thing we try to make sure of is that just each engineer has the same understanding of the project as it's initiated and then going forward over time, so we're not sort of resetting expectations with customers over time.
I'm just going to jump in and add that, and Josh spoke to this, the ex ante review. It's really important that when we're looking at these projects, we get the base case right. And what we've implemented over time, because we also use that, is this second set of eyes to make sure we get that base case right when we're looking to evaluate what the savings are and then what the incentive is for that project.
Thanks. And to build on the timing point, I can't remember if it's Mark or Josh made that point, but um, Earl in the chat also notes that timing is very important in the education segment as their financial cycle is unique for both high schools and universities. Grace, I know we've had some personal experience with that, but could you touch a little bit more on timing with respect to maybe not the schools in particular, but what you found in terms of timing being important through report writing here? You're muted, by the way.
Me? Talk about timing?
Yeah, the importance of timing, just lessons you learned through your interviews.
Yeah. I did feature the most concrete examples again about the maintenance windows. Um, I mean, just the idea that something could be just the absolute wrong timing or a project gets delayed. We've seen this across lots of different sectors. I mean, it's not exclusive to the industrial sector by any means, but what bad timing means to an industrial customer is risk. And risk perceptions are going to get in the way of convincing these customers to participate in any programs. And so those little friction points that come along with the engagement also play a role there too. I don't think I was able to mention that in the presentation, but if it takes too long to go back and forth between the utility or the program administrator about this program, if the application process is a very long process, I mean that those little things in and of themselves can deter participation as well. Not just did we miss the capital planning cycle for this period.
I'm going to add a twist to that, that the timing, sometimes we seem to have a really viable project and then that individual might leave the facility. And in terms of bad timing, we then have to go through that process again with the individual who comes in because there's a risk factor here, especially with industrial customers, that whatever we're proposing is not going to adversely impact their industrial process. And so we need to build that confidence with that new employee and get that project moving forward. So a different type of timing. This one's bad timing, but yeah, that can have a real effect on projects, as Josh was talking earlier about commitment letters and when these projects might be completed.
Hey, Mark, you spent a bit of time talking about free ridership as an issue, and Locke Raper in the chat notes that if a customer is spending its own private capital, albeit alongside an incentive to effectively improve the grid, why are they labeled free riders? It would seem that the free riders are those ratepayers using the grid that take no action, and the label seems unhelpful in trying to get companies to engage. Just wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about free ridership, why it's so important to assess. And I mean, personally, I'd love to hear about why you used surveys and interviews, but we can get to that later.
Yeah, so I would love to. I think that's probably a whole nother webinar, but free ridership is important to assess as it's currently defined. Our free ridership results are carried forward for 3 years going forward. So all of our projects go through that free ridership analysis. And if we're making investments on behalf of our ratepayers where those participants would have done those projects anyway, then maybe we should not have made those investments. I guess that's my take on why free ridership is important. We should be using those limited dollars to motivate customers who are not otherwise moving forward with those projects. It's it's not an exact science, and again, the research that we did this past year was to try and identify all of the best practices to make that assessment because of the importance of it for us. And again, I go back to the ratepayers because they are the ones who are funding this, and we administer these dollars on behalf of those ratepayers.
Can I just chime in on that a little bit?
Please do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So our programs are evaluated by third-party evaluators. To some extent, that's just making sure that we are reporting savings accurately. But there's also they look at industry standard practice, for example. So if some particular measure is found to be industry standard practice already, or there's a code, less than code baseline, for example, we can no longer support them, and we would no longer provide incentives for that.
Thanks, Josh. There's so many great questions here. I'm going to ask, I think, of one more, maybe in the 2 minutes we have left. This is for Josh or Mark. Do you target or market your industrial programs to high energy users? This is Kristen asks, or do you rely on industrial customers to seek out the programs? I know Grace mentioned that these ideas, like the industry she talked to, they come up with the ideas and then they look for the programs. What's your strategy there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we very much look at our highest energy users first. Those are the ones we initially targeted and then reach out to more and more over time. And then again, they come back to us, repeat business.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the third-party program administrators that we did speak to, they also have strong segmentation for the energy use category. So it is confirmed with the research.
I mean,
just
thank you
less.
so much. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Grace. That wasn't very kind of rude. All right.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, I hate to do this because we have such great engagement. But I note that Mark has been apparently invaded. His room has been invaded by a horde, and so he had to run away from this webinar, which I guess happens sometimes. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Grace. And thank you, Mark, wherever you are. We appreciate everybody joining. Please download the report and use it, share it if you feel like it's helpful. And you can reach out to Grace, myself, Josh, or Mark through contacts that I guess we can share in the email that you'll receive about this webinar shortly in the next couple of days. And check out aceeee.org for more webinars like this in the future. Appreciate you coming, and have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.